The problem with being on the next to last panel of 2 days is that everything that there is to say that's good has already been said. So I'd like to thank everyone for what they've said so far. I've learned a lot these last 2 days. I've read, I'm a scholar, so I've read all the books about Mormonism. I've read the Book of Mormon and all that, but I've never been at a Mormon meeting. So this has been great. I mean, Randall Paul's the only Mormon I've ever talked to in depth. So whatever he is, you are to me. And so it's been good. Yeah. I wanted to, well, the title of my comments, is it's okay to think your religion is the best one. And I guess you could call that a therapeutic title, because I find myself in the dialogue meetings that I'm in, that that is precisely what seems to be discouraged in many of them. It's okay to think your religion is the best one. I occasionally have to say that to myself because I think that's true for me. And I want to think that, and I do think that. So that's what I have titled my remarks here. And what I want to do is just talk about 3 things about dialogue as I have experienced it. I'm going to talk about it as I have experienced it, but I've chosen the 3 things I'm going to talk about because I think they may have application to LDS people also. And because we have a lot of the same similar experiences, I think, in regard to our experiences with interreligious dialogue. So I'm going to talk about those 3 things, but let me start by telling you who I am. I am an evangelical Christian. I teach at a Methodist school. What I teach is a history of religions. That's my discipline. Most people call it world religions. I've studied the history of most of the world's religions. My specialty is Buddhism. I have been involved in Christian-Buddhist dialogue for 30 years now. I belong to a group called the Society for Buddhist Christian Studies that meets annually at the American Academy of Religion meeting. I have edited the journal of that society. It's called Buddhist Christian Studies for 12 of those 30 years. And I've been heavily involved. Officers, held the offices in the society. So that's my experience with dialogue, and that's the base on which I'm going to talk about a couple things about dialogue. So let me quickly move to my three things. One, I want to say a word about dialogue as I have experienced it. As you are engaging with the Foundation for Interreligious Diplomacy in becoming the Mormon chapter of Interreligious Dialogue, I want to say a couple things about dialogue that I have experienced. And how can I phrase this? I wish that in doing dialogue we could make it something that would be wider, that more people would be involved. I often wish that more evangelicals would be involved in interreligious dialogue because I think it's extremely important. And I would wish for you that more Mormons than the 70 or so who are in this room would get involved in interreligious dialogue. The reason for that is that contrary to popular views, dialogue is for people who don't know much about religion. Dialogue is for people who don't know what the other religion believes. Dialogue is even for people who don't know much about their own religion, because the main thing you learn in interreligious dialogue is about your own religion. And you'll have to do it a little before you get that. but that's exactly what happens, is you see someone else describe what they believe, and all of a sudden you find yourself in this internal conversation, saying, well, I don't think I believe that, but I believe something like that. Now, what is it I believe? Let me try and think. What is it I believe, and why do I believe that? And that's what happens to you in dialogue. So I say this, that I wish more people could get involved in dialogue, because the exact opposite things happen in most of the dialogue groups that you will find yourself in, and that is that they cater to experts. That when we think about who we're going to invite to be in our dialogue group, we think about someone who knows everything there is to know about Mormonism, and knows almost everything there is to know about evangelicalism. Well, that'd be a good person to get involved in our dialogue group. I don't think that's the case. I think dialogue is for people who don't understand one another. Dialogue is for the people who want to learn about the other, and in the process learn about themselves. So that's, I wanted to get my beef out on the table here right at the beginning, because I think, I would hope that's what interreligious dialogue would become in the future. Let me just give you kind of a concrete example of that. I recently reviewed a book by a good friend of mine, Paul Ingram. The book was called The Process of Buddhist-Christian Dialogue, and I reviewed it for a journal. I say he was my good friend. We'll find out whether he's my good friend or not after he reads the review. But in the book, Paul is a Lutheran mainline Christian. In the first chapter of the book, Paul says that here's what's required in order for one to be involved in dialogue, interreligious dialogue. He or she must be a liberal Christian theologically. They must know one's own theological tradition in some detail. They must be conversant in the other religion. They must have no negative thoughts about the other religion. And then Paul, because he's a process theologian, says it wouldn't hurt if the person was a process theologian. Well, I've been involved with Paul for 30 years in Buddhist-Christian dialogue, and I fail on, I think, 4 of his criteria for being involved in dialogue. I'm not a liberal Christian. I guess I know my own tradition fairly well. I'm just learning about Buddhism, even after 30 years. I've had some negative thoughts about Buddhism upon occasion. Actually, I've had some negative thoughts about my own tradition upon occasion. And I don't know anything about process theology. I did meet Charles Hartshorne on his 100th birthday in Austin, Texas, at the birthday party, but that's all I know about process theology. So my question to Paul is, if interreligious dialogue is for these super intelligent, super broad kind of people, then where does that leave the rest of us? You know, and it's the rest of us that I would like to see get involved more in interreligious dialogue. So that's my first point. Deidre said she thought it was odd to talk about mission in this context. I don't think it's odd at all, because in the church that I come from, the kind of the evangelical movement, whenever I tell people from my church that I'm involved in interreligious dialogue, their immediate thought, usually they say it, but if they don't say it, their thought is, oh, you don't believe in mission anymore. In other words, in the evangelical Christian community, one either does interreligious dialogue or one does mission. One doesn't do both. And of course, I think that's a false dichotomy, but I want to say a word about that. And in order to say a word about that, I need to back up just a minute. I got into interreligious dialogue when I got to know a Roman Catholic theologian, Paul Knitter, was early on involved in the Buddhist Christian studies dialogue, and Paul got me interested in interreligious dialogue in general. And so we started to talk about the theology that underlies interreligious dialogue, and I got to know people. And if you talk to people in most dialogue groups about why they're in interreligious dialogue, what drove you to this, what forced you to this, one of the reasons you'll hear often, it's not the only reason, but one of the reason you'll hear often is, well, I read the paper every day, and I see all around the world people fighting for what appear to be religious reasons. And that doesn't seem right to me. It seems like that the world religions, almost all of them, teach love and fellowship and getting along with people and taking care of people and helping people. And then you see religions being used for the exact opposite reasons, to fight against people of other religions. And so people often get into dialogue for that very reason. And I share that. I think that it's a scandal that we allow our religion to be used in that way, and we should do whatever we can to stop it. But then you also, as a second step, often hear people say, well, why do Muslims and Christians fight? Why do Jews and Muslims fight? Why do Buddhists and Hindus fight? And you, in trying to answer that question, you hear a number of different reasons, a number of different answers. But one of the reasons you often hear is the proselytizing answer. We fight because we're out to get market share, we're out to convert people, and we're out to win them to our side, and that creates conflict when both religions want to do that. And actually today, most of the world religions are now missionary. They have not been all historically. Historically, Islam and Christianity and Buddhism have been the great missionary religions, but these days Hindus do mission, and a lot of the other groups do mission too. So it's a legitimate question, and it hits especially close to home for me. When I was introduced, I'm the dean of a mission school. We offer a PhD in intercultural studies at Asbury Theological Seminary. And so I am directly involved in training not just to future missionaries of the Wesleyan Church, but the trainers and the leaders of the future mission efforts of the Wesleyan Church, and the people who are going to be writing the theologies of mission in the future. So this is a serious question. I have to ask myself, am I contributing to this by training people to do mission work? And so I've done a lot of thinking about this. And here's my conclusions. My first reaction, of course, is defensive. And I say, no, mission doesn't create interreligious conflict. And then I read a history of the Christian church, and I realize, yes, mission does create interreligious conflict. It has, and it still does. But then I have a second response. I say, well, it's not the only reason. Politics and economics also enter into interreligious conflict. But then I have to ask myself, well, what is it about mission when it does create conflict that creates conflict? And that's when I began to get right down to what it is I do as a teacher of Christian mission. And when I hear these discussions, I often hear two different approaches to the conflict that's created by competing missions. One approach is to do away with all mission. I call it the no more mission answer to the question of interreligious conflict. If it's mission, if it's witnessing, if it's evangelism, if it's proselytizing that's creating the conflict, then let's just not do it. And you probably hear that too, and some of you may believe that. I don't know. I don't, but some of you may. So that's one possible answer, and there's some logic to that, actually. If people are occasionally killing other people with handguns, then let's make handguns illegal. You know, I mean, there's some logic to that answer. I don't agree with totally with the answer, But there's another response to this. It's the diametrically opposed response. Well, so be it. Let's just keep doing mission as hard as we can and as much as we can. Let's do what I call total mission. And sure, it'll create conflict for a while, but eventually we'll win everybody in the world, and then the conflict will go away. So that's the total mission approach. And I also have trouble with that one, as you probably would. You know, any means, any way, let's just do it and get it done and do it. So I've been advocating a third approach, a middle approach to this, which I call the better mission approach. You hear a lot, if you're in business these days, about better practices, you know, best practices. And I believe that that's what the religions that have as part of their DNA to do mission, that's what they should do, is that they should develop a set of better mission practices. My wife, Frances Adney, and I just wrote a book, Christianity Encounters the World Religions, and in that book we identify 11 practices that we think lead to both faithful witness to the gospel, but also good relationships with other people of different religions. And in the course of that, we also identify at least that many bad practices, practices that don't lead to good relationships with other people, and of course we don't advocate those. But I think that's what we should be about, in part, those of us who are in mission, is developing a set of practices that we could call better practices. And I think I would try and encourage every religious group to do that, develop their own list, and then I'll bet, you know, oh, I'm not a better, I'm a Wesleyan. I imagine that most of those lists would have very similar best practices on them, but that would be the next step then, to compare those sets of best practices. So that's the second question. The other thing Francis and I are doing is we recently got a Lilly grant to get people of different religions together to study mission together. We're going to meet for the next 2 American Academy of Religion meetings. We call the group a participatory Christian mission, and we've invited people representing other religious traditions to meet with us. We're going to put forward some Christian mission ideas and then say, what do you think about these ideas? I mean, they're the people that are going to bear the brunt of this, right? So why not listen to what they have to say? So, by the way, it's just an idea of mine that I think in our interreligious world that Christian theology that is not done in the presence of people of other religions in the future will be almost meaningless. So now that may be a little bit provocative, but I really do think that if we are thinking about doing theology in the future as a Christian church, the way the world is, that we better include people of other religions in the doing of that theology. Let me say now the third one, which is much shorter. The third point I wanted to make is the need for a public theology. I've heard this here at a number of places. It usually is attached to this word secularization. You know, we've had a number of sessions where we've mentioned secularization. And I think that the reason we're all feeling this need for someone to tell us how to do public theology. By public theology, I mean, how can I represent my evangelical Christian values in the public square in a way that's not offensive, in a way that actually contributes to the public discourse, and does not take away from it? And now I have to admit that my own church has been very bad at this in the last, well, if I say 8 years, then you'll know who I'm criticizing. But it hasn't been particularly good at this. I think that it has to be done, though. I mean, Christian values, traditional Christian values, Mormon values, Buddhist values, all religious values have to be expressed in issues of public discourse. All the ones we're facing, poverty, environment issues, all these things, they are dead in the water if the religions don't get themselves involved. They will not be solved unless the religions get themselves involved. And yet, as religions, I'm not convinced that we know very well how to do this, what our public voice should be like, because we live in a country, those of you who live in the United States, which looks like most people here, we live in a country where we originally solved this problem by separation of church and state, by saying that politics was separate from our religious viewpoints. And for a long time that worked fine because almost everyone in the U.S. was Christian anyway, so we got our cake and ate it too, so to speak. But that's no longer the case. The no voice in the public sphere now thing doesn't work anymore. It has literally led to no voice, no religious voice in the public sphere, to the detriment of our culture. And so we have to discover a new way for those of us who are religious. And I'm not talking just Christian, because that, of course, is the old trap of getting back into establishment kinds of Christianity. But we have to figure out a way to make our religious viewpoints known in a way that will help solve and deal with issues of ethics, morality, care for the environment, care for the poor, in a way that will be good. If you're interested, and I've heard this word secularization, like many of you, I grew up thinking Peter Berger was the last word in the sociology of what secularization was all about. All these people were saying the U.S. is headed for European demise of religion overall. We're going to become secular, meaning by that religion was not going to be vital any longer. Well, that's not happened. In fact, Peter Berger, who is still alive, by the way, has said many times, I was wrong. He said, I'm sorry, please forgive me. He said, that's not the way it's turned out. Religion is alive and well in the United States. Not just Christianity, but all religion. So if that's how you define secularization, then secularization hasn't worked. But I commend to you the latest book by Charles Taylor called A Secular Age, in which he basically redefines secular. And what he means by secular, he acknowledges that religion is alive and well in our culture. But he says what's happened is that there is almost no public or civic support or guidelines for how to be religious. So I'm out there and I see all these religions out there. I like them all. Who used the word holy envy earlier? They're great. I've had a lifelong love affair with Buddhism. I just think Buddhism is the berries. That doesn't sound very scholarly, does it? But I think that it's a great religion. And that's what people face out there, is all these religions, but absolutely no public or civic support. And what Taylor argues in this wonderful book called A Secular Age is he argues that creates anxiety for us, in that we are unable to choose. And we end up creating these, someone else used another word here, heterodox religions, where I think Peter Berger, Robert Bella first came up with this idea. He called it Sheilaism. You know, after a woman he interviewed, Sheila, who went to the Buddhist temple on Wednesday night and meditated, and then went to Friday noon prayers at the mosque, and then Sunday morning service, and she kind of custom-made and created her own religion. And what the point Taylor makes is that's what's happened with what is happening with our culture, and that's what he calls secularization. What that does, he says, is it reduces religion to being just something having to do with personal choice. You know, I like tuna fish sandwiches, you like chicken so we'll eat our own sandwiches. And it reduces religion, takes out its transcendent value and reduces it to just one more thing that we choose every day and make our own on that basis without any regard to what's truly transcendent and truly determinative. Anyway, I think that both of our traditions, the evangelical church and the Mormon church, at least as I look at it from the outside, are struggling with this issue of how to have an effective and proper public voice to deal with the issues, the very real issues and difficult issues that we're all facing. Thank you very much.